Hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to have you with us today in this session, this executive roundtable session in regards to TRT World Forum 2022. So today, the discussion will be centered on the regional and international dynamics and the future of the Middle East. As you know, in the past 2 years, there have been an incredible momentum in the region in which there was a lot of recalibration of the policies. There was a diplomatic appeasement. There were a lot of de-escalation, a lot of dialogue tracks between different countries. We have seen Türkiye, of course, engage in this, but also other countries like the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and others. So this session, we aim to discuss this new juncture and see what are some of the triggers, what are some of the ambitions, what are some of the impacts, and also how can we take this moment into the future and foresee some of the things that could be some key takeaways of this moment. I am pleased to also introduce the excellent lineup of speakers that we have. These are very, very knowledgeable people about the region. So I'm pleased first to introduce Dr. Ebtesam Al-Ketbi. She's the president and founder of the Emirates Policy Center at the UAE. She's also a professor of political science at the United Arab Emirates University. She was appointed as a member of the Consultative Commission of the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC. The Arabian Business Magazine featured her among the 50 most influential women in the Arab world. She also received the Woman Super Achiever Award during the World Women Leadership Congress. She is currently serving as board member of several international institutions, such as the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington, the Global Advisory Board of the Observer Research Foundation in India, the Advisory Council of the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C., and the International Advisory Board of the Italian Med-Or Foundation. Of course, she has many publications, including many books, and she's regularly featured in international media and think tanks. So thank you, Dr. Ebtesam, for being with us. And also, we are extremely honored to have Dr. Dania Thafer. She is the executive director of the Gulf International Forum in Washington, D.C. She is also a professorial lecturer at the School of Foreign Service, and most particularly the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies at Georgetown University in D.C. She's an expert in the Gulf region's security, also expert in U.S. Gulf relations and the political economy of the GCC. She has also a new upcoming book on the region titled Creative Insecurity, Institutional Inertia and Youth Potential in the GCC. Thank you, Dr. Dania, for being with us. Likewise, we are very honored to have Mr. Tarek Megerisi. He's a very, very knowledgeable expert on the affairs of the region. He's a senior fellow, policy fellow at the MENA program of the European Council of Foreign Relations, ECFR, with research interests in the Maghreb and the Mediterranean regions and a long-term focus on Libya. He's mostly working on reform and stabilization assistance to transitional states ranging from Libya, Tunisia, and others, and also he's an expert in the Eastern Mediterranean disputes. He regularly provides commentary to various publications and think tanks worldwide. Thank you, Doctor. And last but not least, Dr. Ufuk Ulutaş. He is also very knowledgeable about the issues of the region. He has completed his PhD at Ankara Yildirim Bayezid University. He held different research and teaching positions at the Ohio State University in the US and affiliated organizations such as the Melton Center or the Mershon Center for International Security Studies. Dr. Ulutaş also served as a Middle East program coordinator at CETA Foundation's Washington, D.C. office and as a founding member at the Mogadishu-based Heritage Institute for Policy Studies. He worked at CETA Foundation in Ankara as the Director of Foreign Policy Studies and lectured at the Social Sciences University of Ankara's Department of International Relations as an assistant professor. He authored many books and publications, including The State of Savagery, ISIS in Syria. Currently, Dr. Ulutaş serves on the editorial board of the Perceptions Journal, and his academic interests include Syria, Palestine, Israel, and violent non-state actors in the Middle East. Thank you, Dr. Ufuk, for being with us. So without further ado, let me start with Dr. Ebtesam, and let us dig a little bit about the subject at hand. We have a de-escalation moment, we have a policy recalibration. Let me ask you about the UAE, as you are one of the experts on the UAE foreign policy. We are seeing that the UAE is incredibly agile, very adept at changing course whenever they feel that there is a need for it. So what are the motivations for the current moment of de-escalation? Is it linked to the core principles of the UAE foreign policy? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Thank you, Dr. Cherkaoui, and thanks for the TRT World Forum for inviting me and having me with you here in this gathering. First, the Middle East new strategic environment is full of threats and challenges. But however, this does not prevent that from discussing opportunities available to improve conditions in the regional environment and more regional cooperation forward to de-escalate tension and enhance prosperity. This is now, if we describe how the region is moving to this environment or process. Now, for the UAE, in the past 3 years, the UAE shifted its foreign policy to focus more on the economy, and the economy is coming first, and then the politics serve the economy and finding diplomatic solutions. So the country is attempting a win-win formula and zero problem with regional rivals and competitors to ensure stability, moderation, and prosperity. So if you move to economy, you need a stable environment. You need to de-escalate, to freeze the conflict. This serves your purpose, and this has paved the way for rapprochement. This is where UAE, so if the region survives polarization, challenge, and escape the temptation of using force and coercion in resolving dispute, the third decade of the millennium will surely be better than the second one. In other words, diplomacy, dialogue, and soft power will be more effective and beneficial than hard power. This should be done without compromising, of course, national sovereignty and security. So UAE believes that its security is part and parcel for regime security, and only collective framework can safeguard its shared vision. This is based on several principles and foundation, like sovereignty, non-interference in other countries' affairs, and resolving conflict through diplomacy. So this is the base where UAE moved towards rapprochement with Turkey, and after that with Iran, that if we have conflict in some files, in the political files, economy can pave the way, and we can cooperate in these issues, and we keep the other issues aside, and we don't let it preclude our way of cooperation. We keep it for dialogue, for negotiation, and we move forward.
Excellent insights. So I will jump straight forward to Dr. Ufuk, if you allow me. We have seen that Turkey also shifted gears in foreign policy, changing some aspects of its foreign policy. What are, in your view, the motivations, some of the motivations at least? Is it mirroring some of what Dr. Ebtesam said, or is it something else?
Well, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be sitting in this panel and discussing regional issues with the panelists from the region. I guess we should note this at the very beginning. I guess this has been a missing component in many of the discussions, both in the Middle East and outside the Middle East. So I guess this is a very valuable panel in that sense. When it comes to the Turkish foreign policy, and and the recent shifts, as you coined the term, I may not be using the term shift, but the changes, in the Turkish foreign policy, I can mirror some of the points that was raised by Dr. Ebtesam. But I guess for a long time, especially during the so-called Arab Spring, we tended, as the regional people, tended to prioritize the ideological, let's say, discussions over some rational, some geopolitical discussions. This is true for almost every single actor on the ground. That's why, I'm talking about the state actors. While non-state actors were focusing on the things on the ground, the realities on the ground, that's why they were gaining the ground, while the state actors were bleeding, actually. And since the ideology kind of clouded our, when I say our, I mean every single actor in the region, when ideology clouded our judgment, our reading of the regional affairs, the real, let's say, geopolitics has always been a missing part in our, reading of the region. That's why we have seen a period in the region where the non-state actors prevailed, from Al-Qaeda to ISIS, from Iran-backed militias, while state actors lost lots of ground, lots of legitimacy, while they were fighting at least on paper, on a theoretical base to each other. I guess the real shift is a very clear understanding that arises from the fact that for some time now, especially after the invasion of Iraq, which has been exacerbated by the crisis in Syria, there is a very strong missing component in regional affairs, which is the United States. Okay? United States is on the ground in the region, but it has been trying to pull itself from the, let's say, the complicities within the region, while focusing only on its national interest. And during this time, U.S. became an actor, at least the regional countries perceived the U.S. as an actor which is not ready to deliver when the time comes. We have seen this in several cases throughout the Middle East. I guess Syria is the best example. If you ask a political theoretician during the the siege of Aleppo, for example, when Russia was using all of its, let's say, air power, advisors, etc., in order to capture Aleppo, the political theoreticians would have thought that U.S. would have stepped in order to counterbalance the U.S., especially in Syria, as a balancing factor, because this is what political science was about, international relations was about. It was what the great power rivalry was all about. Seeing that component, U.S. is only on the region seeking national interest, and it's not delivering to its allies in Syria, in Yemen, in other parts of the world. I guess the regional countries started to think that regional affairs should be solved, regional problems should be solved, mostly through regional initiatives. And before we solve our own problems, no one will come into our region to help us solve our own problems, I guess. I guess that understanding paved the way for the rapprochement in the region, which included not only Turkey and the UAE. I mean, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, some conversation with Iran. We may put Iran in brackets here because it's a total different phenomenon that we are discussing it here. But I guess the understanding that the regional affairs needed a regional solution is what brought many countries into the same fold and think about a shared. I'm not going to be the over-optimistic guy here sitting in this panel, but at least certain shared goals are here to be explored by regional actors.
Well, you gave us some serious things to consider in our discussion. So I'll move to Dr. Dana, since the conversation now is about the affairs of the region and some global power rivalry. What's the view from DC? Do you think that Biden, for example, the election of Biden has something to do with the current mood of reconciliation? Is the fear of like some sort of pressure from like a democratic, more democratic prone administration is one of those, or is just like the region with the region? Is there any influence from the US?
Thank you for the good question. Well, certainly the change in administration in Washington did have an effect on, I think, the movement towards reconciliation in the region. As we remember or can recall, when President Trump was in office, there was kind of a very maximalist approach in handling conflict in the region. And once we saw Biden get reelected, that has shifted. I wouldn't totally credit Washington for everything that's going on in the region, because obviously regional actors have agency. And there was the issue of COVID, which was a major exogenous shock to world economies, and including the Middle East and the GCC states as well. I think the states in the region have realized that the marginal gains from conflict has really diminished, and so there were numerous factors into why there was a movement towards reconciliation. From the perspective of the GCC, I think Dr. Ebtesam Ketbi, she brought up a very good point about economic issues becoming a priority. Now, during the COVID pandemic, I mean, we saw how oil prices fell to, I think, the worst I've ever seen them in my lifetime, at least. And so that caused a real concern for economic development and really put the economies at the forefront of the agenda. And and the concern about navigating into a post-oil or hydrocarbon era. Another issue simultaneous to this is the climate change issue is another concern for the GCC region. They're trying to navigate the movement towards climate change as fossil fuel providers, and they have a large youth population in the region that they need to prepare and enter into the workforce. So there's many factors pushing towards the movement towards reconciliation within the GCC itself and the GCC with the wider region.
Excellent points. I think we can build on them to move to our other guest, Tarek. So tell us, please, from your perspective. Now you are a seasoned think tanker. You're based in Europe. How is the view from Europe? How do they see all this rapprochement? Is it beneficial? Are they suspicious? Is there any kind of frictions with this new momentum?
Thank you very much, Dr. Tarek, and yeah, thank you for inviting me to be here to TRT and for this really intriguing question. And look, I think the view from Europe is always going to be disparate depending on which capital you are going to. But by and large, I think it's certainly a feeling of encouragement coming from different European capitals towards this reconciliation. I mean, you know, the differences between the regional powers have caused Europe a number of headaches because it created effects quite close to home, especially in countries like Libya, where, you know, all of these different groups were engaged in almost a proxy war. So yeah, there is certainly a bit of relief that these countries are sorting out their own problems. This kind of, you know, help yourself also helps Europe because they always say help us to help you, right? So now there is more of an existing framework. There are clear areas for them to plug into, and they see different allies coming together. You know, Egypt, Gulf states, Turkey, which makes their own regional policy making quite a lot easier. Now, I said at the beginning that different capitals will have different perceptions, and that very much depends on the regional alliances that are in place. So, you know, some, like France, are much closer to the Gulf, and they are a lot more suspicious of Turkey. They see them as a rival in various spheres, like North Africa and the Sahel. So there is a bit of suspicion coming from Paris there, or kind of waiting to see where this will lead. But I think, you know, if you go to Berlin, to Rome, even to Brussels, there is more optimism, and they're looking for the opportunity in it now. They're seeing what this really means, you know. Are the regional actors going to come together to create new headaches for Europe, to artificially inflate the price of oil and so on and so forth? Or are they going to make a more stable region and create this platform for better partnership?
Well, I think we have now a good view from different you know, perspectives about the motivations and what triggered this moment of de-escalation, this moment of diplomatic appeasement. So let's move to the next level. You know, like we're gonna slowly increase the levels and the difficulty of the questions. So the impact. What are the dividends? I mean, now we have 2 years of you know, of appeasement, of negotiation, of tracks, of dialogue. So if I start with you, Dr. Ebtesam, is there some good dividends for the UAE? Do the UAE feel more comfortable in this moment?
Allow me, I want to comment on what Tarek said about EU. So, why you look at us that we have to serve their own businesses? Well, the higher prices serve also our national interests, okay? So why they consider that we are causing for them problem? We are looking for our national interest, okay? So, and also the American, when it comes that, you know, Tarek, and this is the problem when we have it with GCC EU in conversation or in dialogue. Look to the FTA. It took 30 years and hasn't been signed. Only von der Leyen in Manama dialogue, she said, we are going to sign. Why? Because they need the oil. This is where now they are going. Before, the sword of human rights is on our neck. 30 years negotiating because they want us, they look us as a followers, not partners. We don't want to be followers, to do whatever Europe wants us to do or America want us to do. We want to be ourselves. And this is the main problem in looking. And this is, if we are talking about dialogue in the region. Also, these major powers, also, if they are involved, sometimes they are putting obstacles in this dialogue between the players in the region. In fact, when Dania said, I remember in 2015, after signing GCPOA, okay, Obama's administration thought that by signing this, so now there is an environment in the region to de-escalate and to have good relation between GCC and Iran, which it did not happen. It was the opposite, okay? Because base of dialogue wasn't there now. Coming to your question, any kind, if still other parties in the region, like I can talk about the Gulf, okay? The first condition to demilitarization in the region cannot be that there is one having a nuclear program, having arsenal of ballistic missiles, drones, okay? And the other side, they have only defensive weapons, and it's if they don't possess that, you will have this imbalance in the region, okay? And you will be always approaching Iran that you want to tame the tiger there. It's always like that. This imbalance, it makes it shaky. Here we have different issues. If we look to Turkey or look to Iran, maybe here Turkey had more options in the region. Iran has its militia, it has its military arsenal. So, yes, economy can be, because IRGC at the end, they are business. They care for their business and they control the economy in Iran. But still, I will not say that this rapprochement means that Iran does not, or we don't consider Iran as a threat. No, Iran is still a threat with all its arsenal. But the problem is what? Is with the European. I've heard this in Manama when von der Leyen announced that Iran is now a threat, considering Iran as a threat. And the German state minister also repeated that Iran. Now, our concern what in the Gulf? That because we've been telling Iran, the European and the American, that these ballistic missiles arsenal is a threat for us, and the drones is a threat for us, and they've never listened to us. When these ballistic missiles and drones reached their homeland, now Iran becoming as a threat. So what I am worrying, and I think the people in the region worrying, that if tomorrow again they are going to have negotiation and GCPOA are going to be signed, that Iran will not be anymore a threat. Although it will not give up its ballistic missiles or its, let's say, they will have only this, and it's always there. GCPOA is only about the nuclear program. They never include the drones and the ballistic missiles. So if we are talking about that, yes, now we are moving to a new era of reconciliation. We have different part. Turkey is different, yes, it's moving fast and different level. With Iran still, because we have still it's destabilizer for the region.
Well, you clearly entered into the phase of talking about the elephants in the room, and Iran is definitely one of them. So I'll come back first to Mr. Tarek Megerisi to at least give us some thoughts, because as explained Dr. Ebtesam, sometimes the European policies are not clear, or sometimes they can be even harmful to some of the regional players. So what can you tell us about this?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not a European diplomat, right? I don't see the world as a garden versus a jungle or anything like that. But look, you responded by saying, look, the GCC states are trying to look after their self-interest by artificially inflating the price of oil. And that's fair, and that's right. But the reason why Europeans and the US are upset about it is because just as the GCC states pursue their interest, so too do the Europeans, so too do the US. This is just the kind of zero-sum world of national interest which we unfortunately still occupy. Like, look, we like to talk in big forums about a global rules-based order and multilateralism, and yeah, sure, we have some of these systems in place, but if we're frank and amongst friends, the world that we live in is one that is governed by national interest and by what your capacity to achieve is. If you can create facts on the ground, that very much alters how these global rules apply to you. If Russia had blitzkrieged Ukraine successfully, had captured Kiev in a week, would we still see the same level of attrition, of animosity that we do today? It's certainly questionable. So I understand what you said in the first point about GCC looking after their interest. And I reflect the European response to that. And that response would likely take the form of free market talk, right? Because when it's the other side, it's always your market should be open. When it's our side, it's always we should protect our markets. It's again what everybody does. But then I don't think that any individual country, especially in our region, should then try to take that same position of almost moralizing and almost creating a boogeyman out of another enemy. Like, everything you said about Iran is true. No one's going to deny that there are militias in Yemen and so on. But Emirates is the same, right? Militias in Yemen, militias in Libya, drones being sent to Libya. And so it's not a state, it's not an idea of one country being the right and everybody has to flock because there's only one aggressor in the region. We have a region that is unfortunately steeped in belligerence and steeped in kind of these very basic primitive means of trying to solve problems. But the kind of optimism that the first round of questions was steeped in before we moved to this.
No, but we want to remain on the optimism track.
So I'm going to go back to it and say that this reconciliation was the idea that, after the big powers of the region banged their heads against each other and didn't achieve anything, they kind of figured out, for the sake of our economies, for the sake of our future, and for the sake of our ability to support ourselves without always having to go out to Baba America or somebody else to look after us, we have to start talking to each other, we have to start building together. And I think that's the idea that we should build on, rather than just trying to draw fresh lines and build bigger alliances to beat up our own enemies.
All right, thanks for your answer. I'll move to you again, Dr. Ufuk, about the dividends. Let's remain in the optimistic moment. So Turkey and all this reconciliation moment, do you think it has some dividends for Turkey?
Of course, Turkey is a country which prospers during the times of stability. The crises that have been going on for the past 10 years actually limited our areas of movement in many parts of the region, starting with trade, actually. Our ties with the Gulf region, for example, pretty much based on the logistical routes from Syria and Iraq. All those, civil wars, terroristic activities over there lack of state control, etc., have been having a very negative impact on our, let's say, logistical connection with the Gulf region. So if there is a certain amount of stability in that areas where we see that trade routes are again open, that the truck drivers can drive freely from Türkiye to the Gulf region and all other parts of the Middle East. Of course, these are going to create dividends in trade and economy for us. But the thing that I would like to underline here is, the period where we saw not conflict, but strong disagreements among the regional actors. Most of those, disagreements were not based on pure geopolitics. This is what I try to, let's say, explain in the first part, answer to your question. Actually, it is like ideology sugar-coated by geopolitics. People start, or the actors started to think that this is really geopolitics that we are really, concerned about. Usually, in many cases, we have seen that, countries like Turkey and Iran are compared when, for example, Gulf countries try to explain their perception of security and threat. I guess these two countries are completely different in terms of, let's say, their geopolitical, let's say, stance in the region, the threat that they can produce towards any Gulf country. One is a neighbor. Iran, most Gulf countries are, receiving direct threat from Iran, and we have seen incidents, and there's an ongoing war in Yemen, whereas we are located on the other part of the region, very far away. We don't have direct, let's say, land disputes or, economic disputes with the Gulf countries. We don't pose any direct security threat to the region. So I don't see any, let's say, Gulf country which would be worried about a ballistic missile coming from Turkey, unlike we have seen discussions of those, when it comes to Iran. So these are two different, let's say, parties, two different countries in many ways. And as I said earlier, when there is stability, dividends are coming in terms of economy, trade. Maybe we will talk about this, defense sector later. But that part is quite important, actually. There is a very good, let's say, area to be exploited by every single actor in the region.
Excellent. Now I move to you, Dr. Dana. Staying on this, some of the impact of the current moment. In the GCC, you are a GCC expert. How do you see? Is the GCC now, like 2 years after the start of all this discussion, after Al-Ula meeting, after all the other meetings? How do you see the GCC position, and especially after the international dynamics and all that? Do you see the power of the GCC is again on the rise?
You mean within itself, or?
Yeah, within and also.
So after all of this reconciliation that happened more recently, I would say that certainly I think the GCC is generally in a stronger position, especially from the perspective of Qatar, which was the state that was blockaded, and now it's hosting the World Cup. But also the cooperation between Qatar and the other GCC states reaped dividends for the other ones as well. For example, Qatar's hosting the World Cup, but a lot of the attendees are staying in neighboring GCC states. And so there's cooperation economically, and they benefited from it, and so did Qatar, because Qatar didn't have the full capacity to withhold all of the attendees. So that's a benefit. we see that there are statements coming out with more of a united front within the GCC. For example, and because the World Cup is happening now, there were a lot of attacks on Qatar in reference to human rights issues and other issues, especially from the Europeans, and the GCC released a statement kind of showing solidarity with each other. And I'm sure there's an economic impetus to this, especially considering that the sports industry is an industry that the GCC states would like to partake in, and they don't want all this negative media coverage affect future opportunities, because there's significant investments in infrastructure and stadiums for these sports. And so it goes back to how economic issues became the priority, less interest in ideological contentions, and I think this makes the countries in general in a stronger position to pursue their interests as a bloc, especially economically speaking. Now, politically speaking, I would say there is a divergence among the GCC states. Each one has emphasized very clearly on maintaining their sovereignty, and you'll see these terms kind of repeated itself when you listen to the different GCC states talking about their foreign policies. And so I wouldn't conflate the idea that, okay, there's more solidarity in the region. That means that politically these states are going to be on the same page. One example is on the issue of Iran. Although I would have to say, and I would like to underscore, although there are amicable relations with some GCC states and Iran, there's certainly an underlying fear of Iran's ambitions in the region that is undeniable. But still, each state has kind of went forward with how they view the best way to contain Iran. Some states went with containing Iran through engagement. Others, namely Saudi, is probably having more of a tense relations with Iran. So I think I would say that the main benefit for all of these reconciliations are more so, I think, economic than they are translated into political outcomes.
Okay, so since the subject of Iran has been repeatedly brought, it's definitely an elephant in the room. We know the de-escalation moment was engaged between different protagonists, but also there were some meetings between the Iranians and the Saudis, for example, in different locations, including Baghdad and other places, but it seems that the discussions didn't reach any kind of high level yet of achievement or any kind of overtures. So, Dr. Ebtesam, if I may, how is Iran now? I know the threat, you spoke about it, different speakers spoke about it. I know the kind of missile attacks that was, for example, the city of Abqaiq in Saudi Arabia subjected to, and also some attacks on UAE soil, like on assets. So, of course, it's claimed that it's coming from the Houthis, but everybody knows that, the Houthis are not operating alone on this. So how do you see the future? Should Iran, from the perspective of the UAE, be treated as a threat, number one, to the region, or should it be involved in this de-escalation moment at some stage?
What is the problem? The problem is in the nature of the regime. Okay, this regime still believe, and it's not acting a normal state, respect the international law. Okay, this is still consider themselves a revolution, which is still loaded since 79. This whole revolution came and finished even the French Revolution. And this revolution, it's still downloading and it's not finished. So, and this is the problem.
Maybe they need a better internet.
No, the problem, I was in Baghdad 2 days ago and was working in the oil and gas company. And he was telling me they have a dispute with the Iranian based on gas they gave Iran and they didn't pay and they don't want to pay, so they took it to the international court, and that international court, the decision for this company. And the Iranian does not want to implement anything or give money. And he said, when I told the guy, he said, you know, we don't respect the international law. The only we respect our law. So, but this doesn't mean, I mean, when you look to the Z generation in Iran now, and what they want, and they want change, and they want a normal relation with the outside, including their neighborhood. They want freedom. They want something it's not existing in Iran, and they look for it. And this is challenging the regime. The regime doesn't want to change vis-a-vis its neighbor, vis-a-vis its people, and it's a military regime. So, and I said in the beginning, there is a tiger or a devil on the other side. How you will deal? You deal that you want to tame this, okay? Because the other side that we had these missiles reaching us either by direct from Iran or its proxies in Yemen and Iraq. So if they are still there, you still feel you are under the threat. Okay, if there is no balance between the GCC and Iran, still we will have this. But as I said also, that at the end of the day, the IRGC inherited the bazaar. So they are controlling all the companies, all the economy, and they want to exchange with the, especially when they are under sanctions. And there's other thing that, and UAE tried before the missiles reached us, that if there is something can be working and we can work GCC and Iran on environment, on water scarcity, and this can involve all in the region, whereas this is not an issue that it can create a conflict between each others. But I mean, water, yes, it can be a conflict between Iraq and Iran, because diverting the rivers towards Iran also create this scarcity. There is also some of conflict between us at GCC and Iran in terms of desalination, because they are saying that this is causing more the water more salty, and we have to stop, and we cannot stop because we don't have water. De-escalation needed, but there are conditions for this de-escalation. I'm always saying it takes two to dance the tango, okay? Cannot, if I de-escalate and the other side did not, will be the imbalance, it always will be like that.
So we have the view loud and clear about some of the issues created by Iran in the region, especially from the prism of the UAE. So another elephant in the room might be also one of the dangers to the threats to the current de-escalation mode is also the war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine sometimes creates some reverberations in the region. So, Dr. Ufuk, what do you think? I know Turkey has so far greatly dealt with this issue very skillfully, diplomatically, but it's still something that's we don't know how it's gonna move forward. What are your thoughts at this present moment?
I guess the war in Ukraine kind of increased the understanding among the regional actors in the lines that I tried to, explain in the very first part of my remarks. I mean, the understanding that the regional problems are to be solved by the regional countries. If you are going to wait for, external actors to step in and, solve those on your account, you'll be waiting, till the end of the days, I guess. And Ukraine is a kind of a striking example in the sense that, we have seen the urgency felt by the Western world in general, both the Europeans and the Americans, in supporting Ukraine against a belligerent actor as Russia, while, throughout the region, we have had these conflicts, civil wars, external, let's say, interventions, foreign interventions in the country, and those regional actors, especially the closest allies to the United States, were left empty-handed in terms of support, direct support coming from that. Russia was very active in Syria, with the help of Iran and regime, they killed thousands of people in Syria, but U.S. did little to nothing to help on the ground. I mean, there were some, let's say, programs, etc., but they were not designed to, ultimately solve the problem on the ground. It's pretty much the same thing when it comes to Yemen. So, in a way, the war in Ukraine may have brought the regional countries together, even closer. And for Turkey especially, both during the pandemics, like COVID-19 pandemic and the Ukraine war, created or even deepened the food crisis, the logistical problems, supply chain problems, and I guess. Especially if you add to this picture the cost of, let's say, the freight, shipping for those products coming from China, I guess Turkey is becoming maybe even more active in trade as a center of production. So for Middle Eastern countries, for most of them actually. To buy products from Turkey will be much cheaper than buying products from China, in many ways. So the Ukrainian war is influencing our trade ties with the Middle Eastern countries in that sense too, I guess.
Well, this is really interesting, and we thank you for sharing these insights on how sometimes threats can become opportunities if the countries of the region can make a good sense of it and take that opportunity on board. So I'll move to you, Tarek Megerisi. I know you're an expert in Libya, and Libya is one area where we have. I mean, if we can test this new moment of de-escalation, maybe Libya could be one of those places, hopefully, that would see something moving forward. Maybe not now, everything is okay, but is this moment of de-escalation can sort the situation out over there, in your opinion? Can we be optimistic? And also, on this, Russia's role, especially now that after the war in Ukraine would be, more like becoming less and less involved in Libya. What are your thoughts?
Thank you. That's two big questions in one. I guess this is level 3 now. So I'll deal with the first one first. And look, on the reconciliation issue, I certainly think that we have the grounds to be hopeful, at least over the medium to long term. Because, I mean, look, what drove so much dysfunction and ruin in Libya was this zero-sum competition between regional actors that became reflected on the ground through their Libyan proxies. So if we are to move to a new level whereby regional actors have different means for solving their problems and are actually becoming more constructive and cooperative rather than antagonistic, then certainly that can only reflect well on the situation in Libya. But I do worry that we might be getting a bit ahead of ourselves. So, all of this reconciliation is still very early days. And I think we might be letting our hope just run away here. I mean, if we look at what has actually happened, so, we have a few big meetings between world leaders, but on the ground, in the theaters where they compete, they are very much still maneuvering against each other. It's almost like they're saying, we're going to try this reconciliation thing, but we're going to keep playing our game just in case it doesn't work out to make sure that we have the upper hand. And this is a big reason why, the war in Libya might be over, but there has been a complete stalemate on the ground in terms of the political process. And that's very much this reflection of what I was talking about, that each side is still trying to consolidate its own power base rather than to cohesively build towards a solution. The Russian question is a bit outside of this, and look, the Russians are certainly suffering because of this misjudged war in Ukraine and their inability to manage it competently. But I don't think we're going to see a removal from the region. I mean, not unless somebody takes it upon their shoulders to try to remove them. And obviously there are different areas of different importance. So if we go to Syria, with Latakia and the naval base there, this is a core strategic interest or national level interest for Russia. And they will not withdraw and they will not leave it easily. But if we go to other theaters, Libya, Mali, Sudan, Central African Republic, this is a completely different game for Russia. It's not something which they are officially engaged in. They're engaged in it through private military contractors like the Wagner Group. So they might be scaling down because they have to move assets from one country to Ukraine and to that front. But these deployments are still very profitable for them. They're profitable financially, and they're profitable because they provide them with geopolitical tools. So, Russia can try to use its proxies in Libya and its Wagner Group in Libya to shut off the oil, to worsen the energy crisis for Europe, for example. So yeah, they might be looser on the ground, but unless somebody actually tries to remove them, they're going to stay there.
All right, so now the things are getting, we are getting to level 4, and we're gonna move to Dr. Dana. There is this key question of sustainability. I mean, is this moment, can we be hopeful that it's gonna last, it's gonna consolidate? Because there is an issue, for example, even within the GCC, and you are an expert, again, on the GCC, for example, the GCC as an institution, sometimes it's lacking mechanisms, sometimes it's, we have seen it like when there is a crisis, it doesn't really kind of handle those moments in a way that is solid in terms of mechanisms. So do you think this current moment can last, in your opinion? Do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, nothing lasts forever. We wish so, but I think, I mean, we're moving into a new era. We went from the Arab Spring era, which was a very difficult one politically and ideologically speaking to navigate, and I think now the different actors are kind of consolidating. Will have already kind of consolidated whatever wins or losses they have achieved in the Arab Spring, and we're entering into now this phase of, like we've mentioned before, prioritizing economic interests over ideological or political rivalries. Now, it's hard to say how things will last. The politics of the region has become, I would say, a lot more personalistic than it was before. So, if certain individuals are making decisions, it's hard to predict maybe where they will go next on their priorities. And that's not only, I think, something in the GCC. I mean, we've seen that region-wide. We even see that in Washington as well, moving from Trump to Biden. And so I think that for the near term, we can probably see this moving forward. But I still would question the whole idea of reconciliation, because from the GCC's perspective, I mean, having Iran in the neighborhood, it's not really a very relaxing environment, and so they're always on the edge. They're always tense. The war in Yemen is still raging, and drones have been coming over borders, and maybe yes, from an intra-GCC perspective, there's some reconciliation. Of course, with Turkey, there has been a reconciliation. But I don't want to just be over optimistic about reconciliation, especially when it comes to Iran.
All right, so there is some cautious optimism here. I'll jump to you first, Dr. Ufuk. I mean, if we want to just have like a moment of hope, how do you see the ideal scenario?
Well, I guess the understanding is quite a shared one among many Middle Eastern countries, that things should start with the economic aspects. I guess that's a good starting point where we can build economic relations. Trade is also a kind of a confidence-building measure among different actors, and we shouldn't be so over-optimistic and claim that, just tomorrow these states will come together, create a kind of a common mechanism, and map a kind of a scheme of a regional scheme or a mechanism where they can act together, an ideal, a mutual ideal. There's a long way to reach there, but until then, we're going to see a lot of transactional relationships. Things will be transactional, give and take, and many actors will wait and see where these transactional steps take them towards. In certain areas, including trade, defense, again, maybe education and cultural and tourism, let's say, sectors, we're going to see closer ties among actors, and then we were going to see, where all these sectors will lead us to. But again, it's going to take some time to reach that moment where we can sit down and talk about some very hardcore geopolitical issues and find a mutual way to go forward.
Okay, and Dr. Ebtesam, how do you see, for example, let's say the future? I know it's very hard to foresee or to give like some definitive commentary moving forward, but what would be something that's like an aspiration for the future from a GCC, from a UAE and GCC point of view?
There are different scenarios, and depends on the actors and the players in the region. I think the region is fed of bloodshed and conflicts and wars, and it took a long time and energy from the region and its people. And that's why when I say, and there is also, but I am optimistic because there is a new generation. There is a new generation in the region whom they speaks at least the same language and listen to the same music. And this is globalized world. So they have also sharing it with the other generation, other continents. And they are more practical rather, and they did not go through ideologies which Ufuk mentioned, nationalism, Islamism, okay? They are, I would say, IT generation. They call them Z generation, okay? So they want to live different life. And interact with each others in a different way. But we have those hot spots will take long time. Palestinian issue, especially with the new government now, with the extremists, the Libya issues and the Yemen issues and the Syria issues, because it's not anymore domestic issues, because of many players, regional and international players. That's why it will keep it open for a long time. Now, I would say you will find different cooperation, either by GCC, Turkey, GCC, Iran, I won't say, because you mentioned the Saudi negotiation. It did not continue because Iran is using the Houthi as a weapon if there is, but how? If the negotiation with the European and American did not go well, they will use Houthi, but to attack whom? To attack Saudi, to attack UAE, to attack the GCC. Because any retaliation, the American or the Israeli hit the Iranian, they will retaliate against us. So if this is also the imbalance of power, will stay for a long time in the GCC region. Also, this is, I would say, this is a shaky situation. But if there is some, I would say, wise people in the region, on the other side, on the Iranian side, that there is a lot of issues we can cooperate and collaborate. I mentioned environment, I mentioned water. If the mentality on the other side work from win-win, that cannot be zero-sum, okay? We will enter a new era of collaboration and de-escalation in the region.
Okay, we only have 5 minutes left, so we'll have some final thoughts from both of you. So, Dr. Dana, what are your final thoughts about this, all the things that we discussed?
Well, there were some points that I would like to talk about that I think is important when you look at the GCC. And the new shift sort of towards multipolarity is an important issue that affects the region. And I think in that situation, the GCC has more ability to maneuver politically. And so the GCC has been kind of expanding more towards the east. And I think these are really important aspects that also affects the perspective on these states' roles in the global community. I mean, they view themselves now more as partners and less so, they don't want to be viewed as clients. And so they look at themselves as mid-level powers, and they have no interest in choosing, between great powers. And I thought that this was something I just wanted to highlight that we didn't talk about. And I think another important issue is, and I think this is probably because I come from Washington, there's always a conflation between, I think, strategic hedging and strategic alliances. The GCC states are shifting eastward for many reasons, but I think when you look at a strategic alliance, the alliance with the United States is still pretty strong, and that's a really important point to underscore about the position of the GCC states, because we always say shifting eastward, but what exactly does that mean? And it's important to underscore that the GCC states are looking eastward, but still are maintaining their existing alliances. It's not, you just zero sum, you go one way and completely negate the role of the US in the region. Thank you.
All right, thanks for those. And from your end, Mr. Tarek Megerisi, any final words?
Thank you, Dr. Tarek. All right, I'll try and be quick. We covered everything, and I'll end on a controversial note, right? I'll try and throw a wild card out. Everything we've said so far about reconciliation makes the assumption that this is something which is inherently good, right? So all the powers of the region are coming together and they're working together. That must be great. But I think we're missing this kind of, what is the underlying culture or the underlying political aims and goals of these alliances? And that will tell us a lot about what it will look like going forward. Like, are a bunch of big powers in the region just ganging up with each other in order to help suppress the rights and desires of broader populations in the region with the help from some Israeli technology? That's probably not going to go great, but this is sometimes what these alliances look like. How can we divide the pie amongst ourselves in Yemen and Libya and elsewhere? The other side can be a realization whereby they say, look, we have a number of shared problems. And I think Dr. Ebtesam hit on this really important point of water and climate and so on. We will have more problems, more lines of competition amongst ourselves. So do we accept that we are kind of stronger and more capable of forming real solutions to these problems by working together?